So I will introduce our presenter for tonight. Someone that I'm thrilled is talking to us, and also I'm thrilled that she's here in Binghamton and seems to be here to stay. She was recently in New York City, and before that, she was in other places. So Christina Zawerucha is an organic agronomist, and she's also as a second language or English as a second language instructor. And she's specialized in developing sustainability literacy programs. She's worked with immigrant populations and has developed programs with social enterprises, nonprofits, higher education institutions in New York City, Pennsylvania, Ecuador,
if you want to.
Ukraine, Virginia, Haiti, and Ethiopia. Her talk tonight is going to be centered in Ethiopia and Africa. She's been featured in the New York Times, the MacArthur Foundation documentary, I Learn America, and Al Jazeera America. So she came to Binghamton about 2 years ago. Not quite 2 years ago. She escaped New York City just as the pandemic was hitting. Came up here because she had been here a few years ago, going to Binghamton University. And she's also a great singer. And maybe someday you'll get a chance to hear her sing. So we welcome Christina. I'm sorry, one more thing. You came here to be the community garden farm manager for Vines, and you can talk about that as you wish, Christina, but we'll turn it over to you and you take it from here. Thanks.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for that lovely introduction and for inviting me here to share today. It's been about 5 years since I worked in Ethiopia full-time. So some of this might be a little bit rusty, and I had some technology problems. So like halfway through, I'm gonna have to switch to another slideshow because some of the pictures just didn't come through, but I have them in another slideshow. So just bear with me. And thank you so much for letting me speak today. So I'm gonna share my screen. It's in presentation mode, share screen. Let's make sure. All right, does that say Ethiopian farming and climate smart agriculture?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about my work with a social enterprise called GreenPath Food. We are Ethiopia's first, hang on, it's not letting me switch. Oh, there you go. Okay. I was really honored to be part of a team that launched Ethiopia's first certified organic fruit and vegetable company. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit about that experience in my life. So I want to introduce you to a smallholder farmer in Ethiopia named Balinish Bedhe. She is 33 years old at the time of this photograph. She has 2 children and a very sick husband. She's raising her family on less than $2 a day. She has to carry water about 2 miles every single day to irrigate crops. And I'm going to talk about how we wound up helping Balinish help turn her life around using climate smart agriculture. So people always talk about, you hear people talking about how in East Africa, there are problems with adopting the Green Revolution and new technologies. And what we think of as a permaculture company or as an organic social enterprise is that the challenge is the solution. So if you have smallholder farmers who are not using chemical pesticides and fertilizers, they in fact have a competitive advantage over farmers who do. But the problem is, how do you link farmers like Balinish to markets that will actually pay premium prices for organic production and incentivize the increase of organic production. So that was the problem that GreenPath Food was set up to solve. So GreenPath Food was established in 2014. It's the first and only organic certified fruit and vegetable company in Ethiopia. It is Ethiopian owned and seeks to empower smallholder farmers by growing diverse, nutritious, and sustainably produced food using permaculture. The idea was incubated by a team at MIT Development Lab. Two of my colleagues, Sid Kamath and Eric Cooper, used to work for the Agricultural Transformation Agency of Ethiopia, which is like the USDA, but for Ethiopia. And they were brought in to bring data-driven decision-making to that institution. And when they were there, like after they'd be working all day, doing consulting on traditional agriculture, they'd go back home and they'd say, well, what if we could really do things differently? You know, what if instead of, you know, giving handouts, people earn money as farmers? What if we actually incentivized growing organically instead of using chemical pesticides and fertilizers? What if we encouraged farmers growing nutritious dense food instead of commodities? All kinds of different supply chain questions that got them thinking, and then they proposed this idea. And then they wound up reaching out to me to help make their idea come into reality. So as a social enterprise, GreenPath aims to support smallholder farmers and address major development challenges. So looking to alleviate poverty among smallholder farmers, investing in women in rural farming areas, improving health and nutrition for families, and promoting environmental sustainability on farms. And I'm going to talk a little more in depth about all the different ways that we did that. For people who may not be familiar with a social enterprise, social enterprises focus on having a triple bottom line. So the company needs to be profitable, but we're also looking to optimize environmental stewardship and care for people as well. And so we really thought that a more sustainable model, rather than a charity model, which is often what one sees in Ethiopia, the idea that farmers could actually make money doing the right thing, you know, as opposed to just a charity type of model, and the dignity that comes with that. So just talking about why Ethiopia, why did we choose to launch a company there? So the focus, our main crop was organic avocado. And so Mashev, which is like USAID for Israel, had introduced new varieties of avocado through partnership with USAID and the Agricultural Transformation Agency. So they had brought in these new varieties of avocado. They were grafting Hass, Fuerte, Nabal, Pinkerton, all the different varieties onto the local Ethiopian variety of avocado. But it just kind of ended there. You know, there's this idea of like, well, they would distribute all these seedlings to Ethiopian farmers, and it would increase nutrition for the Ethiopian farmers, and that was that. Now, what the founders of GreenPath realized is that, you know, there was a lot of demand for avocado in the Middle East and Asia, and they were importing their avocados all the way from Guatemala and Mexico. And so Ethiopia was uniquely positioned to offer competitive, high quality organic avocados for those markets. And even during times of the year when they were not abundant in the primary exporters of avocado. And so that was our focus crop. And the question is, why on earth did they hire somebody like me to help make this happen? So I think Scott mentioned that I'm an ESL teacher, English as a second language teacher, as well as an agronomist. And so I focus on working with immigrants, refugees, and students with interrupted formal education. I taught in the New York City Department of Education for about 10 years, working to help students who were high school students with very limited literacy learn how to read, write, and grow food at the same time by designing and installing organic gardens. I also launched a small farm with my best friend, Alan, who, at the time, there wasn't even a farmer's market. This was in Sullivan County, New York, and Wayne County, Pennsylvania, right on the border there. And so you see us actually, we drive around with our pickup truck and sell off the back of our truck because there wasn't even a farmer's market back then. I also ran a little organization called Permaculture for Peace down at Virginia Tech, where I was working again with immigrants and international students, where students would present weekly in these, we called them shed talks. We built a stage in the shed, in the barn at the farm that I was renting. And this was at the time, I'm also Ukrainian by heritage. I had been in Ukraine for an advanced permaculture training right before the Russian invasion of Crimea. And they asked me if I could help support a permaculture course for displaced persons in hospitals there. And so we were kind of doing the Zoom thing before there was Zoom. We did it over Google Hangouts, and it kind of caught the attention of people that were interested in this kind of thing. And they reached out to me and invited me to apply for the position with GreenPath. So GreenPath was looking for somebody that had a permaculture background, had some farming background, who'd be able to work with smallholder farmers who had different levels of literacy and numeracy. Because a big part of organic certification is actually communication, documentation, and paperwork. And so they needed somebody that could help organize the smallholder farmers, incentivize them to start growing organically, get them organic certified, and start the export process of avocado. So I want to tell you a little bit about Butajira, Ethiopia, where I lived. It's 2,300 meters above sea level, 2,400 millimeters of water per year. That's more than the city of London. But all of that rain falls in 1, 2, or 3 month period. So you'll have 3 months of very intense cold rain and then 9 months of drought. So much of what we focus on in this bimodal rainy pattern is how do you catch and store rainwater so you can continue producing food throughout the growing season. Butajira has a population of about 18,000 people. Their primary source of income is through agriculture. The city itself is pretty cosmopolitan. It's 50% Muslim, 40% Orthodox Christian, and 10% Protestant. And about 55% of the people live under $2 a day. That's a photo right there of the Butajira market. It's the biggest open market in the SNNPR region. And, this is where farmers normally would sell their avocados or their produce. And when you look at this picture, you'll notice not a whole lot of vegetables there, not a whole lot of fruits. And can anybody imagine why that might be?
The climate?
That's a really good guess. But in a place where there's not regular access to electricity, refrigeration and supply chains are a really big issue. So commodities that can be dried and stored without refrigeration being the real money makers, because the fruits and vegetables just don't last. So our part of our mission was to try and get people to start growing more fruits and vegetables.
So sorry to interrupt, but it must be pretty hot there at times.
Yes. Oh yeah. I mean, it's a zone 9 climate. So I mean, it's a tropical climate. It's right on the equator. It's full sun. During the tagline for the Ethiopian tourism when I was there was 13 months of sunshine, because they have a different calendar. There are 13 months in their calendar. September 11th is Ethiopian New Year. They have a different clock than us. So sunrise is 12 o'clock. What we call noon would be their 6 o'clock. if you say 4 o'clock, it means 10 o'clock, you know, like it's a very different kind of system. So imagine doing international trade using a different calendar and a different clock system. You know, so it's very different infrastructure wise in every imaginable way.
It's pretty high though, isn't it, Christina?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where I was, you know, the elevation was very high, and that was why we were able to grow such a variety of crops. You know, but there's so much variation within the country as well. But I put up this image here just to show, I mean, Ethiopia, this particular article in 2017 was mentioning how the government incentivizes Kabele leaders. You cannot be nominated to be a Kabele leader, which is like a village leader, unless you sell a certain amount of DAP and urea to your constituents. So it mentions that in this article, and it kind of gives you the idea that the government is very focused on a more traditional form of growing commodities for export and trade. It's a very corrupt place. It's a place where, you know, the electricity goes out maybe 3 times a day. The government can switch off the internet for weeks at a time for any reason that they want to. They own and control all telecommunications. And so when we talk about climate change and sustainable agriculture, these infrastructural or institutional systems that you're trying to operate in really impact how you can create behavior change in a system like Ethiopia. So looking at the Ethiopian, the Butajira rain-fed crop calendar, this is something that I drew to kind of demonstrate what it looks like over there. So you will have a dry season called the Bega season. And that is for about, you'll have 6 to 9 months of drought. That's these yellow sections. And then you have about 3 months of very heavy rain from June through August, September. And the challenges are everybody's planting here in June because everybody's doing a rain-fed irrigation system. And so people are planting here in June, but then there's a very high risk of disease because it's so cold and wet during that time. And so there's a lot of pest and disease pressure that you don't see here. But farmers don't have a choice. That's the time that they need to plant because they don't have water at other times. And then there's this wet soil. So this is wet soil, wet climate from June until September, October. And then you have this period where the soil is still wet, but the air around it is dry. That is the optimal time to be growing and harvesting crops. And so we were introducing modular perennial polycultures, which I'll describe in a little bit, but using modular permaculture systems that try to help and extend this green section here, trying to make this section of wet soil, dry climate longer, so that way farmers could be growing food into this dry season for longer. There is also an occasional, like every other year or once every 3 years, there'll be a belge season, which is like the small rain. And that would be sometimes between like February and March. If they're lucky, they'll get another rain then. According to some scientists, as you may be familiar, agriculture is responsible for about 44 to 57% of man-made greenhouse gas emissions. And most agricultural soils are losing between 30 and 40 tons of carbon per hectare per year from tilling or plowing. In Ethiopia, farmers plow a lot, and they're focused on growing these annual export or annual commodities such as maize, teff, wheat, and barley, as well as enset or false banana, which is a famine food that actually grows throughout the season, that will grow even under very difficult conditions. I have a great video about that if people ever want to see it. And again, the farmers in Butajira, They probably produce the least amount of greenhouse gas emissions, but they are arguably the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. They're on the margins of society already. As you saw, they're reliant on rain-fed agriculture, and changes in climate are impacting their ability to grow food. But we argue that smallholder farmers don't need to be the victims of climate change. Instead, they can be the champions of a new form of farming that catches and stores carbon and produces highly nutritious food for the world. This is a picture of a family that we worked with there in Butajira. And we've also got Tigistu, he was our nursery manager in Butajira as well. So we focus on using permaculture. Permaculture is a system of organic agriculture that mimics patterns in nature to create self-regenerating systems. And so we really focus on encouraging farmers not just to plant perennial avocados, but to plant avocado ecosystems. And I'll explain a little bit about that in a little bit. But the idea of planting polycultures or intercropping in a way so that way every single plant in that system provides an ecological service to the other plants, catches and stores carbon, helps catch and store rainwater, and also has an export market value. And so we're focused on care for the earth, care for people, and return of surplus to both, the permaculture ethics, so to speak. So we developed these managing microclimate through modular and profitable permaculture system. Again, when farmers plant perennials, plants that come back every single year, it helps decrease soil erosion and it conserves stored carbon in those trees and in those plants. By catching and storing rainwater, this can prolong food production through the dry season. We very much encouraged farmers to mulch, which helps keep in soil moisture and nutrients in the soil. Encouraging farmers to plant perennials, which will produce food year round and reduce the need for tilling and plowing, and increasing crop biodiversity, right? So if you're growing a monoculture of only maize or only teff, and there's a climate shift, you're in a much greater risk than if you're growing a variety of crops. So permaculture tenets: care of the earth, care for people, fair shares for all. There are, depending on who you ask, there are like 12 different permaculture principles. I'm not going to go into that right now, but that is the inspiration for how we designed these systems. The idea of catching and storing energy, increasing connections between different aspects of that system, just systems thinking when it comes to growing food. So in order to encourage farmers to grow using a different kind of system or growing in polycultures, we understood that the change had to be profitable, right? These are farmers that are living on the edge of survival. And so it's a very risk-averse population in general. People are not willing to take a risk unless there's guaranteed to be a 300% return on whatever they invest in. And so we focused on linking smallholder farmers to markets. They would pay premium prices for organic produce, and that would incentivize them to plant more perennial fruit and vegetable crops. And if farmers could grow, if farmers earn more money growing perennials using permaculture, they'll keep expanding that, and they'll have a better, good for the planet, good for them, good for their livelihoods, and good for us. I think I already went over this. So we were focused on really thinking about what kind of crops had an export market value. We focused on creating supply chains that would link the smallholder farmers to international markets. We ensured that our farm gate prices when we bought from farmers were 20 to 30% higher than local market price. And we work to help the smallholder farmers gain organic certification so that way they could get steady state farm gate prices for all the organic produce they grew. So what you have here is a diagram of a guild to go, which was our, in permaculture, we talk about guilds where you have different tiers of crops growing together, providing ecological services to each other. So we were encouraging farmers in a place where there is actually not much composting going on. The waste from the cattle are being used in fires to heat their homes. It's very hard to get people to recycle nutrients there. But we focused on growing avocado as our focus crop, encouraging farmers to dig an eyebrow swale around the base of every single avocado tree in order to catch and store rainwater around the root system of the avocado, encouraging them to mulch around the base, and then planting polycultures that were 30% perennial and 100% marketable. So you can see we had farmers growing lavender to attract pollinators, chives and scallions that help to attract certain kinds of aphids, thyme and oregano and sage. All of these are perennial plants that have either attract pollinators or detract pests. So this is just the simple idea of like, you don't just grow an avocado by itself, you're growing an actual avocado ecosystem. And so you can see, if you really want to get deep in the weeds, by knowing what we were encouraging farmers to plant, we could predict exactly what it was that they were going to be growing different seasons. And we would actually sell these polycultures as packages called Guild to Goes. We also had what we called perennial pathways for farmers that were, avocados take about 4 years before they actually start producing fruit that you can really sell at market. And so we did want to encourage farmers to be planting perennials, but there needed to be quicker returns, right? They can't be waiting 3 or 4 years to start making money. So you say, okay, we'll sell you these avocado seedlings. And in the meantime, we want you to plant these annual combinations of crops in pathways between your avocado trees, along with some of these other perennials. So these were 50 centimeter wide hills. They're enriched with compost, bone meal, wood mulch to increase drainage and supply a steady stream of nutrients. They were intercropped with a mix of perennial and biennial herbs that were rich in phytochemicals, such as rosemary, oregano, chives, lemongrass, basil, and parsley. Again, these phytochemicals are trapped into dirt pests, such as aphids, whiteflies, powdery mildew, and others. These perennial pathways are permanent. So they would have perennial pathways between the avocado trees. And this is kind of a better illustration. And then you have these annual alleyways. So that way you could get a quick return, make money, make hay while the sun shines, so to speak. And so we had different rotations. So we had chilies and legumes, Brussels sprouts and beets, squash and legumes, and root crops. And so, this is a picture here. So there are avocado seedlings growing here, along with the mix of chilies and I guess some other legumes in this photo. And again, we would have yield projections showing exactly what we expected farmers to be producing, putting into Excel, well, what are the different kinds of crops that we would be growing? So that way you can actually scale up something that's very complex, like permaculture. When you make it modular, you can scale it up or scale it down. So for a farmer who can afford only 5 avocado Guild to Goes, we have that. And for a farmer that can afford, 50 Guild to Goes, they can scale it up that way as well. And we did sell these Guild to Goes at about heavily subsidized, right? We would sell them for about 10% of the actual cost it took for us to raise all of these seedlings. The idea being that if a farmer invests in something, they're going to be more likely to take care of it rather than it just being a handout. And sometimes if people get something for free, they might not value it in the same way as something that they actually pay for. And the nice thing is that the farmers would start making money very quickly after they put in these pathways. So you can just see some of our yield projections for some of the different crops that we were growing. So in order to scale up permaculture with smallholder farmers, again, we made we offered farmers premium steady state farm gate prices. So every 2 weeks we would come and we would harvest from farmers and we would pay them, as long as they were growing organically, they would earn 20 to 30% more than the local market price for whatever they were growing organically. Creating these modular polycultures that was easy to scale up and scale down this type of farming, and then creating supply chains that would link smallholder farmers to the markets that would pay a premium. Okay, so this is a photo of the first cohort of smallholder farmers who got certified with us in Ethiopia. You can see Balinish right there in the front. This is about 15 households that went through our training program. And what this actually looked like, I mean, we wound up going out, identifying and surveying different organic plots. In reality, we started off with about 15 farmers. Like I had a handwritten note of 15 farmers that had received avocado trees from local Mashev avocado nursery, had to go and track those people down and then convince them to stop using whatever pesticides they might be using and commit to growing organically. So we had to survey all these different sites. And what we wound up doing was actually, a lot of farmers were not willing to completely give up using chemical pesticides in the beginning, particularly for their traditional cash crops. So what we wound up doing was actually certifying parcels of land within their farm as different spaces. So certain parts of the farm were certified organic and other parts were not. And they were all certified through GreenPath. In terms of training for farmers, I had a staff of about 15 people. Each farm production officer and had a deputy farm production officer working with them. And each team was responsible for training, harvesting, and monitoring about 30 farms. Farm production officers were college educated. The deputy farm production officers were actual farmers from Butajira. So it's a nice mix of people who had all Ethiopian staff, people who were trained more formally in agriculture and people that were trained more informally in agriculture. They would visit each farm about every 15 days. And they would offer bonuses, incentives, or they were offered bonuses and incentives based on their partner farmers' production of export quality crops. So they were coming in every 2 weeks and training the farmers on a better composting method or a better mulching method, or a better fertilizing method. And the yields went up. That was good for their teams. We had a red, green, and gold team, the Ethiopian flag colors. And sometimes the red team was on top. Sometimes the gold team was on top. And we had kind of spread it out so that way smallholder farmers were spread out evenly among them. We created a farmer service center kind of after we started working with smallholder farmers as outgrowers. So this is a picture of the avocado nursery. And again, you'll see that we're growing all kinds of other crops, not just avocados, in the farmer service center. So that was a place that they could come. They could get training, they could get resources from us. That was where they'd go to pick up their seedlings. So you can see Mulugeto's here picking up some, it looks like it's chilies and something else here. I can't really see it. But he's picking up those seedlings to bring back to his farm to plant. And so you see people planting their, these are some of the annual alleyways, perennial pathways, planting there. Here's a picture of a typical harvest day. We were not allowed to, we were originally letting farmers harvest themselves, but organic certification required that we supervise the harvesting in order to avoid people being tempted to mix non-organic and organic products together. But this is a picture of a typical harvest day. This is a picture of our on-farm training and monitoring. You know, so you can see Shamalis and his team there are speaking with some of the farmers about, you know, they're kind of asking them every single week, you know, did you do this? Did you do that? We actually had a rubric where we would score the farmer, and they needed to meet certain criteria on the rubric for us to be able to harvest from them. We also built Butajira's first modern cold store and pack house. So this is a picture of some of the women working in our pack house. They're weighing and bundling parsley, which is another major crop for us at that time. We also wound up using a CoolBot. For people who know vines and how we built our cold store, this is the same technology we used in Butajira. And again, in a place where people don't have refrigeration or regular access to electricity, the fact that we were able to set this up, I mean, this is a technology that you can connect to a standard air conditioner, and tricks the air conditioner into thinking that the room is really, really hot. And so it turns that space into a refrigerator, a walk-in cooler. So we wound up building 2 different cold stores, one for taking off the field heat and another one for long-term refrigeration. As far as transport and export transportation, Ethiopia is a landlocked country. So everything had to travel by air freight. So there were sometimes some tricky things we had to work out. If we had buyers that really wanted tons of parsley, we often had to, you know, pack other items as well in order to justify, I guess, the export to export over airlines. We got farmers to create their first bank accounts. So all of our transactions were cashless. And so we insisted that every single household, that the woman in the household must have a bank account that we would deposit into. And, you know, it's interesting because when GreenPath hired me, they were inviting me to come and teach permaculture to the smallholder farmers. And I got there and I'm like, wow, they're already practicing permaculture. I'm learning from them. You know, it was more a question of how do we translate what these farmers are doing to these certifiers from Germany that would help them understand that what they're doing is organic. So, so there aren't many permaculture, at the time that I made this, there weren't many permaculture farms that were actually certified EU organic. One of the challenges is that certification can be quite cost prohibitive, even for Western farmers. It can cost like $5,000 to get certified. And so what we did was that we basically bundled all the farmers together and made sure that they would be, get them all certified together as one group. Most certifiers at the time were accustomed to certifying farms that are organic monocultures rather than rotations of polycultures like what we were doing. And 40% of the smallholder farmers were pre-literate, but they're required to keep detailed records of all inputs and outputs on their farms in order to stay EU organic certified. So we bore the cost of certification for each cohort of farmers who are meeting our internal monitoring system. And because it's a group certification, we needed participatory guarantee systems. So farmers holding each other accountable and making sure that they were really following the guidelines and making sure that we were building a lot of trust between each other in terms of growing organically and ensuring that we were going to buy everything that they grew at fair prices. So we created an online, offline internal monitoring system, completed over 15 days. We also made sure that every farmer had a binder with a copy of their certification records that were updated every 15 days that took a look at all inputs and outputs and practices at the farm. But we also used ODK Collect on our phones to keep track of that data. And this also is how we predicted yield so we could communicate with buyers about what we were expecting and when. And just very important in terms of, and I managed that side of it less. We had somebody else that was talking with buyers. That wasn't me. I was working with the farmers. So not sure about all of that. So GreenPath, when I came back in 2019, they had now built a 3-hectare company farm in Goyaban. So this is like a before and after photo where they were building a new cold store, presenting at different trade shows in Europe. So not just the Middle East and Asia, but going into the UK and the Netherlands and Germany. New shade nets. We had gone up to, and some of this I'm going to skip over because it's kind of over. This is kind of, I don't know how relevant this is now. This is more kind of like a pitch about what we're planning on doing. But we gotten up to 22 hectares of organic land, 450 organic avocado trees, 78 partner farms. Also working to get solar powered irrigation systems at farms. We really weren't doing drip systems because it's so hard to get plastic over there in a landlocked country. But partnering on that for key farmers. We dropped certain kinds of crops that were less marketable or less successful and focused on others that had more market demand. And in terms of, this is an independent analysis that was done about GreenPath from the Acumen Fund about what went well. So 53% of partner farmers were very satisfied with the performance of their work with GreenPath. About half of the farmers who sold to GreenPath for technical assistance and farm gate purchase. So there's some honest feedback here about what could be improved about the program. But in terms, like the things that were a win for us was that at the beginning, so 81% of respondents reported that they had earned more income. So before GreenPath, only 26% of them were earning income every month. After working with GreenPath, they were earning, 81% of them were earning a steady income every single month. So 42% of respondents of the smallholders felt that their quality of life was very much improved. 23% felt that there was no change. It's interesting that the whole idea of introducing the idea of growing organically, about 56% of farmers had not sold such produce regularly. About 35% had never sold organic produce. And they basically said that they wouldn't be growing organically if GreenPath wasn't there, pushing for that to happen. In terms of what motivated farmers to work with us, references from other farmers that they trusted, access to organic seedlings, training and technical assistance, improved income or livelihoods, better price for their crops. And they seem to really value the training and technical assistance, the prices that we paid at farm gate for what they were growing. So some of the challenges and tensions that we faced when we were there, EU organic standards were not always appropriate for the Ethiopian context. You know, just not all of the tools and resources are there. And some kind of fertilizers that we kind of take for granted in the West are not available there. Inconsistent internet and cellular service, inconsistent water and electricity, tension between international market demand and crops that are locally adapted to the climate. The Ethiopian climate itself was very challenging to grow in. Access to materials, very interesting, very different context from here. There, plastic and paper are very expensive and labor is cheap. Here, it's the other way around. Farmer confusion about organic and non-organic inputs. You know, before we came, there was no awareness of what organic even was. You know, people just, it wasn't on anybody's radar. Nobody ever thought about it. nobody sold at Butajira market and paid more for something that was grown without chemicals than with chemicals. Misperceptions about the role of social enterprise. Again, this is a place where everything is either, when you see there's foreign corporations that are quite extractive, or there are charities that operate very differently from a social enterprise, and we were neither. But some people would often confuse us with other kinds of institutions that were around and how we operated. Wanting to test things a little bit more sometimes. Sometimes it's difficult to retain talent. Sometimes you needed more support, at least for foreign staff. Totally different culture and social norms. And finally, the Ethiopian education system. I mean, when I was brought in there, you know, I didn't wind up doing all the things that I expected I might be doing. You know, I wound up finding that I was more of an analyzer and decision maker. And I feel like the education system there, even for college educated people, there's a lot of room for growth in terms of getting people to be more analytical. Oh yeah, and pest and disease management, getting access to biological controls, even getting organic seed and seed stock. You know, we try to get it from farmers as much as possible. It was very difficult to document that, and sometimes to get it approved as organically sourced. But I did want to say that I had a really incredible team over there, and that you're only as powerful as your team. And I managed to see what a team that was really solid and had a lot of vision and was committed to what we were doing was able to accomplish with very few resources. And so just a very inspiring group of people that I got to work with when I was there. So thank you very much. I do have some other photos if people want to see from when I went back there in 2019. But just a few things. So the company itself has evolved. And so now one thing that you can get in the United States is kib tea, which is grown by the smallholder farmers. It's primarily marketed in Europe, but you can still get this. As of October 12th, I got a phone call, and with the civil war and COVID and all the pressures that have been happening there, on October 12th, 2021, they decided to shut down Butajira operations. Basically, one of the main markets was the UK, and the UK put a ban on all commercial air traffic from Ethiopia. That was a big hit. And just the general instability in the country under the current situation, the government is not allowing any foreign loans. And so when you're running a social enterprise, it needs to be profitable. And under these conditions, you know, people put in a really good fight, but it's unfortunately over for now. But what I will say that was really great for me, when I came back there in 2019, they flew me out to kind of give another training and see how things had grown and changed. The best thing that I saw, so in Ethiopia, there is a plant called chat that people grow, and it's a stimulant. It's a drug. It's not legal in the United States, and it's a cash crop. It's like growing tobacco or something in the United States, and farmers would absolutely refuse. They would keep on growing chat. They would always use pesticides on their chat because that was a money maker for them. And when I came back in 2019, I went to Wagayo's farm, one of the farmers I was working with, and I looked out there and I said, Wagayo, like, didn't you have a big field of chat here? And he said, yeah. He was like, but I pulled them up and sold the seedlings. He said, I was making more money growing organic chilies and green beans for GreenPath. I was making more money growing that than growing chat. And so what I've got to say is that if farmers are making more money growing vegetables organically than growing drugs, then I think we're doing a great thing. So I will say that that's something that was very happy for me. Just a few photos. This is the foreign team when I came back to visit. This is JC and Eric. This is one of our guards who decided to photobomb us. But this was the day when Ethiopia there was like a day that they planted 1 million trees across the country, and I happened to be there for that. And it was that was all over the news at the time. This is the new cold store, which is much, much bigger and more professional. I wanted to show this. So we had to design a lot of our own pesticides, organic pesticides and herbicides. So you can see people mixing different local things, actually using local rosemary, local eucalyptus, things like that in order to create organic pesticides. Our larger expanded nursery, me seeing Balinish again, our packaging, expert packaging. And that's it. I'm sorry I don't have, if folks have any questions, please let me know. I'm excited, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
So thank you, Christina. That was very, very enlightening. And I guess off the top of my head, number one thing is, how difficult was it to convince the first group of farmers to even try this idea and explain to them what it involved, and to win their support, and then to continue getting them to trust each other? Because you mentioned that the continued operation of this, you were actually looking for internal monitoring. In other words, you were hoping that they would rat on each other if they violated the rules of maintaining the organic certification, which to me, that kind of might be a real sticking point.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that in the beginning, the early adopters are not people who are the most marginal. Like we actually targeted more influential people who had other sources of income as well. One of our biggest growers was somebody who owned a gas station in town. And if you own a gas station, that's one of the wealthiest things that you can do, right? So once he started making money growing organic avocados, so a lot of people, like after that first season, when they saw that the more risk willing farmers were earning money, that's when people started gravitating and wanting to grow more. And so I will say that a lot of it was pretty market based. We did try and explain and educate farmers like what was required for organic versus non-organic, and having that agreement saying, we are going to harvest from you every 2 weeks. Everything you grow that meets these rules, we're going to buy every 2 weeks, everything you grow. Even if we couldn't sell it, we would come and we'd harvest it anyway, and we would develop that consistent relationship. And so then when it was time to actually do a big export, we had the stable relationships built with them. As far as people monitoring each other, yes, the idea was like, okay, if somebody from Germany comes in and they find out that even one person is mixing organic and non-organic stuff together and trying to sell it, it ruins it for everyone. So that's like really more what we meant in terms of, people, farmers holding each other accountable. It's like, don't ruin it for all of your friends. Please abide by these rules and be honest about it. And we did wind up having our staff there, every 2 weeks, which is quite a lot of, it's a pretty high touch kind of situation. So I don't know if that answers your question, but as far as like actual harvesting, it was our staff that was supervising that.
Okay, yeah, that pretty much answered the question But I'm still kind of wondering, how long did it take to, to make this happen? Maybe I missed or forgot what you said when this whole project started, and I guess it stopped just within a matter of months ago because of coronavirus and the UK
and the
Civil War. Yeah, it just seems like it's sad that this tragedy ended up happening, but I'm wondering, was it actually self-sustaining without help and subsidy near the end when it was finally shut down due to this unfortunate civil war and coronavirus, double whammy?
Yeah. So I think so I was there from 2014 through 2016. That's when I was working there full time. As far as more recently, like there were times when it was profitable, and then there were times when it wasn't, right? And there is kind of like this valley of death that startups need to survive in order to remain viable. And my understanding was that we were profitable once we started shifting, not just from the Middle Eastern markets, but started selling to the UK and focusing more on green beans and chilies. But there still needed to be, investment, and there was just not, it's more like we were not permitted to invest. Like foreigners were willing to invest, but under the Abiy Ahmed government, they were not permitting any foreign investment. So people were willing to invest and they couldn't. And within the country, there's not that much wealth, and we could only get a license for export, not for domestic sales. You couldn't have both a domestic sales license and an export license.
Wow. So that's some tough constraints. So the ban on external investment from people outside of Ethiopia, is that a political reason that they didn't want to seem like they were needy? Is that what the reasoning for that was?
I'm not sure. I don't know the answer to that,
okay.
But I do think that there are a lot of pretty silly situations there. I remember the government would just switch off the internet for weeks. Like if there were protests happening in another part of the country, they would shut off all cellular service and telecommunications for weeks just because a protest was going on. And then you're trying to run a business and you can't send an email, you can't make a phone call. And if so, it's a place where it's a beautiful country, beautiful culture, lovely human beings. It's like a second home to me, but there are a lot of really fundamental problems with how things operate there institutionally. There's an incredible amount of corruption that we really did not engage in, but that slowed things down for us several times. Like people would expect a bribe for us, and we're like, no, we are a no bribe company, and that really made things go slower. But yeah, I don't know all of the reasoning behind that. I think that they just don't want foreign intervention helping out with anything else, but I don't know.
Did you, two more things that I'll let other people talk. I'm sorry that I'm hogging time here, but number one, can you please spell the name of that tea so people have the benefit of that? And then the other thing is, did you get the sense at the end that at least the local level political people saw the benefit of what you were doing and what the farmers that were working with you were doing there, and did they at least support that locally, if even if the national government didn't?
Yeah, what I heard, and again, I haven't been there since summer 2019, but when I spoke to my colleague when I got the call that we were shutting down, he did mention that there was a change in administration locally. And so the previous administration had been very friendly to us and loved what we were doing. And then with the new administration that came in, they were there were reasons why they were much more hostile to what we were doing, and they were creating roadblocks. So we had a lease for, that farmer service center, the 3-hectare farmer service center. They were choosing not to renew our lease and instead lease it to another group. My understanding was that it was political. It's like favoritism to another, like their political base as opposed to foreigners, But again, it's an Ethiopian-owned company, but there were, three foreigners coming in and bringing in new kinds of ideas.
Okay, Valdi, are you done?
The name of the tea, spell it out, please.
Oh, KIB, K-I-B, KIB tea.
Oh,
KIB.
okay, thank you. Yeah, I couldn't see it before.
So KIB means circle in Amharic.
Okay, thank you very much.
On circular regenerative farming.
I've got a couple of questions.
Mm-hmm.
So this cooling operation, it went through a couple of generations.
Yes.
And how was the cooling achieved, and from what energy source, especially if some of the electricity is sporadic?
Yeah, I mean, so it was connected to the grid to the extent that there was a grid, but we had a backup generator, which always had to be fueled and ready at all times. In terms of different iterations, the first cold store that we built, it was quite small. It was maybe 15 by 15 feet,
Mm-hmm.
And then we wound up building a second one, and the one wound up being, they're just different temperatures for different kinds of crops and how they're stored optimally. And then as we scaled up, we needed bigger storage, bigger refrigeration spaces.
And did one of the photos show that there was something happening underground connected with the cold storage?
Yeah. Let me look back at that, because that's where's my mouse? Not responding. So I think that picture may have been of a well. I'm trying to see where I can find that, because some of it I kind of pulled from another presentation that was showing all the upgrades. So yeah, that photo there on the left, there's a picture of the new cold store, and then to the right of that there are two wells,
right?
Two in-ground wells, like a well and a pump house. That's what that other photo is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, was it? You said you had a guard that was in one of the pictures.
Yeah.
Was a guard required on your first visit there, or just the second one?
So that's if you want to hear a funny story.
I do.
So you hear gardeners here in Binghamton complaining about groundhogs. Well, in Ethiopia, the real problem are monkeys. So if you have an avocado orchard, monkeys just wreak havoc on anything they're growing, and they're very smart and very mischievous. And the thing is that unless you're part of the military, you're not allowed to carry any kind of firearms. So we needed somebody who would use a slingshot to actually, a slingshot at basically harass the monkeys to keep them off of the avocado trees. And, we asked our team, Mohammed and Musti, we need a guard to help keep the monkeys out of the orchard. And then they brought us, I forget the gentleman's name now, because it's been so many years, but they brought him to us, and he's very old. He was very old and always falling asleep. And Musti was like, oh no, but he is the best. He is the best monkey hunter, best monkey guard at all Butajira. And he really, really was. And there was a time when, somebody was not convinced that he was a good guard, and they tried to fire him. And he just kept on showing up every day and refused to leave. And he actually, the day after, he basically, not to upset people, but he demonstrated you know, how good he was at
And what was the ammunition in the slingshot? Do you
just the
recall?
rocks.
Rocks. Okay. Now this airfare to the market, how much did that add to the cost of the product at the receiving end?
That is a good question. I didn't really handle that side of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know the answer. I know that it was like an air freight as opposed to passenger freight kind of deal.
Sure.
But that wasn't my work stream. I'm sorry.
That's all right. On your second visit, did you see the continued existence of the pathways and alleys that you had established in the first and your working years there?
Yeah, actually, I mean, so there were different kind of variations, things that kind of simplified a little bit as we scaled up. And I think that may have been more market driven. There was demand for green beans and chilies. So there was a lot more focus on growing those annual alleyways, but the perennial pathways were still there. But the perennial pathways were primarily focused on rosemary, lavender, and what was the other one? Let's just say rosemary and lavender were the ones that were still around. So some of the other things like the chives, the thyme, that didn't stand the test of time, so to speak. But rosemary and lavender and lemongrass was still going strong. Yeah.
So the pathways had plants which would repel pests. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, that's the idea. That's the concept.
How did it work?
Well, I think I have less data on that. You know, but you know that was the concept behind it. What I will say is that having the lavender intercropped around the avocado trees, that really increased production. There was a visible difference in the amount of pollinators and fruit yield that you saw on avocado trees that were intercropped with lavenders from those that weren't. So I would say I have more data on attracting pollinators and increasing yields than on kind of like demonstrating, you know, oh, like the avocados didn't get sick. Well, is it because we planted rosemary and lemongrass around it, or is it just that they didn't get exposed? You know, it's really hard to say.
Well, who knows?
Yeah.
In the dry season, was it so dry that it was dusty and windy and dusty?
Yeah, I basically felt like I was at the beach every day, but there was no water. You know, it was just very, very hot, very sunny and dry. And then in the rainy season, just like thick, heavy mud, like impassable roads. Like everywhere we go, we'd go in a tuk-tuk bajaj, which is like a 3-wheel kind of motor vehicle, because a car would not make it on these roads. I mean, best way to get around is like with a donkey and cart or a tuk-tuk bajaj, because you can get out and push it.
So has the village seen fighting recently?
So what I would say is that, as far as I know, there's no violence in Butajira, and I always felt very safe living there. But the road between Butajira and Addis Ababa, the capital, which you need to get to for markets, or if you want to leave the country, you got to get there, that there's conflict there, right? And the current hotspots for the civil war are to the north, coming down to Addis. And we're based in the south, the Southern Nations, Nationalities, and Peoples region. But, you know, having the capital shut down and engaged in, you know, in warfare impacts the rest of the country, whether or not you're in a hotspot.
Sure.
Yes, Professor Shepard.
I've got a couple questions. One follow-up on what Jim was talking about. I always think that in a less developed country, that one of the major problems is transportation. So Jim was talking about sort of getting to Addis Ababa. How far was it from Addis Ababa? And
200 kilometers.
Sorry?
About 200 kilometers south of Addis.
10?
200.
200 more. Yeah. So, during much of the rainy season, presumably you couldn't get things to market, right?
Well, so there's an asphalt road from.
Oh, there is. Wow.
Yeah. So that's an asphalt highway, and you get a minibus and load up the boats and carry it up. But these farms are not necessarily on the asphalt road. They are on dirt paths. So for the idea of getting things from farm gate to the farmer service center to the pack house and all of that was the more challenging part. And we would have to use Bajaj. And when the Bajajes wouldn't work, donkey cart. Donkey cart was the most reliable way to move products in a timely fashion when the weather is like that.
But that would have been a reasonable number of kilometers.
Yeah, I mean on asphalt, yeah.
Yeah. No, I meant getting to the asphalt road.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, just one other question, but actually, Doug has an interesting question in the chat. Maybe I'll defer to him. He says, are there rainforests in Ethiopia? Sure. Are forests being cut to provide for areas for permaculture? So
no. So what I would say, at least where I was, so if you go further south, like in Bunga and Kaffa region, there are some tropical forests there. But where I was, I mean, places are heavily deforested. Everything is chopped down, used as lumber, used as a fuel source. And the only thing you see growing anywhere is eucalyptus. Eucalyptus is an invasive species that has created a monoculture over there. And it's allelopathic. So you can see that where it's growing, another 5 meters away from it, nothing is growing around it because of the juglone hormone that's in their root systems that prevents other plants from growing. But it's a culturally significant crop. King Haile Selassie received the first eucalyptus trees from the Australian government when he was recognized as the leader of Ethiopia. And so it's a source of great pride for the Ethiopian people. And it's become part of the tradition that people are burning eucalyptus leaves during their coffee ceremony. They're using it to build furniture. Like, it's a very useful invasive species that people like a lot, but they don't realize that it's basically monocultures of eucalyptus trees for miles around, and so the actual agrobiodiversity is not strong. So when we introduced these polycultures, we're actually increasing the diversity of what was growing in those fields.
Thank you. I had one other question. These smallholders need to grow their sort of staple crops, like I guess teff, wheat, and other things. How much competition is there for growing cash crops?
I mean, so what we did was that we got sub-parcels of their land that we certified as organic for growing fruits and vegetables. So what you traditionally see is that usually the plowed crops, the cash crops like teff and maize, are grown by men using plows, and they're used for market. And then traditionally, the women are growing home gardens, which are close to the home. And that's where you have your fruits and vegetables growing next to the house. So, I'd say maybe about 20 to 30% of the farmers' actual property, we wound up certifying for organic vegetable and fruit production. And then the rest of their farms, we let them continue growing as they normally would. So yeah, it's an interesting breakdown of how things are actually produced there. And usually they're growing fruits and vegetables for home use. and not for sale. And then the grains for sale using pesticides, plowing, everything else. Yeah. Oh, I mean, people store it. You know, they have like a gotera. They have like storage holes, basically, like literal like corn holes, basically, where they're storing everything. Yeah.
I would think teff and wheat would be their basic staple, though.
Yeah, I mean, teff is what's used to grow injera, and it's the it's actually like very hard to find. I mean, most everyday people, you know, the injera that they eat, the traditional bread, they only have teff in it on more special occasions. Right? Teff is quite scarce. They're usually day to day. It's heavily supplemented with maize or barley, and the teff in the injera is more high end. You know, they'll wind up sending that up to Addis and selling it there.
So do they make their bread of barley or wheat?
So they make it with maize.
Oh, maize. Okay.
A lot of maize, sorghum, but also barley and some wheat.
Christina, how many of the people in Budajar were farming, apart from the home farms you mentioned?
Yeah, I think it was about, I think I put it in one of the first slides.
Oh, okay.
Hang on. But it was the majority of people make at least part of their income from farming. I want to say, let's see. Yeah, 90% earn their primary income through agriculture.
Okay, you said that. All right. Hey, is it easy enough for you to show the very last slide? It was like a summary, I think, of sorts.
Let's see. Let me share my screen again.
Okay.
And I know I'm a little rusty because it's been a while since I presented on this. So I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize.
This one?
No, there was, challenges. It was maybe.
Yeah, this is me focusing on the tensions and challenges.
Well, there was another one I thought after this, but this is.
And so some of these were created not by me, but by the Acumen Fund, because they came and evaluated our program as like a third party, the Lean Data Analysis Acumen Fund.
I thought it was right before the very last slide where you asked any questions. So this was the very last one, right?
This is the very last one. What was it that you remembered? What did you want to, like, I mean, I would say, you know, I felt like I was so grateful to have that opportunity. And it was a huge, huge growing experience for me. You know, I kind of wanted to flip, you know, my bread and butter was teaching English as second language. And then I was doing agriculture work on the side. And this was an opportunity to flip that and really, you know, have agriculture be my bread and butter and have my ESL experience be, you know, something that they needed. In that context, they really needed somebody with my skill set. And, you know, it was, I think I've been invited to give a talk at Lyceum next month, I think it's in January. But that focus is going to be more on like my personal experience, not so much about the microclimate and profitability, but more about what it was like as a single woman, you know, helping launch a startup in the country. You know, so if you want to come and tune into that, I think that's going to be January 31st. I'll be speaking at Lyceum, but it's a little more memoir than this.
Well, I think we're at the end of the time we've allotted. Valdi, you want to wrap us up?
Well, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
You kind of hinted at what I thought of while I was sitting here and other people were asking questions. You mentioned how the men traditionally had been growing crops for money and the women had been growing crops for their own family. did that present a tension? And also from your own perspective, you being a woman, I'm also wondering, did you have a translator? Did you learn some of this language yourself before you went there? How did you navigate that? And it's up to you how in depth you want to answer this.
I mean, so I focus on teaching English literacy through content. So I ran programs in New York City for students with interrupted formal education. So pre-literate immigrant teens and adults coming to the United States. You do not need to speak the language of somebody in order to learn how to read and write and speak, right? So from a linguistics perspective, I was really excited, and I understood what was going on in my brain. So all these years I've been getting my students to learn how to read, write, and speak in English through agriculture. And now I had to practice what I preached. I had to learn Amharic by practicing agriculture. And I did have, I had my number one assistant was this gentleman right here, Mohammed Abdurrahman. And he didn't speak any English when I met him. But he was like a kid that Ezra, who was one of our, he used to work with us and then he moved to something else, an Ethiopian guy. But he chose him at random to be my assistant. So he was in the beginning, like I was teaching him English, he was teaching me Amharic. Yeah, it's a little bit sad because he passed away in March this past year. So that's a little bit sad, but he was my assistant in the beginning. And of course I learned a lot of Amharic there. I'm much stronger at speaking and listening. I never really learned how to read or write, but most of my farmers couldn't read or write either, so it wasn't too relevant. As far as being a woman there, I mean, that was a really interesting experience. I mean, going there, I was a single woman in my 30s, going there. People are like, and I was a boss, right? So like I wore like a suit and jeans. You can see my outfit there. I tried to signal that I was in charge. When they were interviewing me to join GreenPath, I asked them, what is it going to be like for me as an American woman leading a team, running a company? And he's like, you're going to be like a panda in the zoo. You're going to be like a dog playing the piano. And I got a lot of that, and just women are always working. Women are always working like crazy over there to be like, you see the men just kind of hanging out. Women are always chopping wood, carrying things, caring for kids, cooking, managing fire. They're always working. But, people would say, oh, Christina, you have such a social life. I'm like, social life? What social life? I have no social life. Then I realized, so like when I go to the cafe, to do my work, electricity's out. I'd go to the local restaurant because I'm not going to cook over a fire in the dark at 9 o'clock at night. And I realized I'm the only woman at the cafe. So you spend 2 years being the only woman at the cafe, and you get tired of it. So it was definitely interesting. I told GreenPath I would leave when my loneliness exceeded the rate at which I felt I was growing professionally. And when it reached that point, that's when I left. And I felt like I grew a ton. It was like the most incredible experience I've ever had the privilege to be a part of. How
about the women that you worked with? That it looked like at least one woman was participating in this farming program. Was that a struggle for her too?
So you mean my coworker or the actual farmers?
I think the actual farmers, the local.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time, but very rarely were women actually head of household. right? Usually, even if they're the ones who are doing all the work, on paper or in terms of major decisions about what happens with the money, it's not the women who are the deciders, right? So Belinish was in a unique situation because her husband was so sick. She was one of those rare instances where she was actually head of household, you know, technically. But in practice, you know, that's why we had the requirement like, oh, your wife must be on the bank account. You know, it cannot be you. You know, she needs to be involved in what happens with this money. That was one of our requirements, you know, and it was a large enough incentive that farmers were willing to, you know, get their partner's bank account.
Hey, quick question. I'm sorry to add one more. What did you observe about the average family size, and do the kids have a chance to go to the city and get an education and have a different kind of life?
Oh, I think there's very little upward mobility there. In terms of family size, I mean, certainly much larger families than we see here. Mm-hmm. I'd say probably like maybe six kids per household.
Yeah.
Pretty typical. You know, and in order to, there aren't that many universities. To get into a university, they have something like the SATs, and you have to get like a perfect score on them to get to go to these universities.
Yeah.
And the universities themselves are not that great. You know, I feel like a lot of the, you know, I had some really talented staff, but, you know, they were just trained to kind of memorize information. So they were very good at, you know, kind of reciting information and really technical kinds of questions. But some of the, you know, problem solving, analytical thinking just wasn't fostered the way that you might see in a liberal arts education in the West. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's something that's like one of those like cultural changes that I think, you know, will happen gradually, you know, but there wasn't, you know, it was very hard. It's very hard to get a good job there.
Yeah, and it looks like the population pressure is going to be increasing. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. So what was nice, what we always got feedback on was like, isn't it great that these farmers are making a living being farmers? You know, yes. Instead of having them, you know, try to get a college education and get a job in the city, here they are making enough money to put a floor in their house, to get a water pump, you know, to put a roof on, you know, send their daughter to
heat this up.
By growing food.
It's going to get down.
To going to the city and working there and sending money back, right? It's a different kind of value proposition.
Not time yet. It's not time yet. Oh, it is.
Well, yeah. Folks, thank you so much for inviting me to speak. And if you ever have any follow-up questions, it's probably better for you to email my Gmail account, the czawerucha@gmail.com. That's the better way to reach me.
Thank you, Christina.
Yeah, thank you guys for all the beautiful things you guys are doing in the community, and keep me looped in if you have any future talks.
Yeah, we hope we can do some things with you down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you.
Bye.